Hello, good evening, and a very warm welcome to the second in this series of the RoR Winter Webinars, designed to help you all get the very best out of your former racehorses and to help you, indeed, if you don't have a former racehorse at this stage, for any future plans that you might have. For the rest of this winter, we'll be looking at a whole range of topics following on from the last webinar that we did where we looked at horse management, the first steps. Tonight, we move on a little bit further and we go to the early stages of the retraining process and look at the role and value of flat work with a bit of groundwork as well thrown in. So we will loop in a little bit of nutrition and farrier and saddlery topics as we always do through the whole series. But you remember, you can go back and watch that first webinar in case you missed it. They are all going to be available, all 4 of these webinars, to watch back again. So my name is Mark Hayward, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by a great panel once again. And the first of those to introduce to you is Yogi Breisner. Yogi is one of the best known coaches and instructors in equestrian sport. As a rider, he was a member of the Swedish eventing team from 1976 to 1987, winning European team gold in 1983 and competing at the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. For 17 years, he was chef de keep and performance manager, helping the British eventing team to success at 4 successive Olympic medals, as well as 5 European team titles. He's a long-standing friend of RoR, and he works with a whole range of trainers, horses in racing, and indeed loves to work on that gap, bridging the gap, we should say, really, between horse racing and equestrian sport. The second of those, and a lady which had a lot of success this year, great to have her with us, Laura Collett. And together with her horse, London 52, she was a member of the British Olympic gold medal winning team in Tokyo earlier this year. Now based in Gloucestershire, she's been a professional event rider for 16 years. Before that, she competed show ponies, working hunter ponies to championship level, and then progressed into eventing to be a professional event rider. From that success, she started to enjoy from 2005 onwards, and indeed highlighted this year. Her riding career has experienced highs and lows. The biggest of those, quite high profile, was that serious injury that she incurred after that fall in 2013. She's put that well and truly behind her and has now got that fantastic partnership with London 52. She does have a long history and a connection with racing. Of course, many of you will know she had the brilliant Corto Star and more recently has worked with one of Europe's highest rated flat horses, Dubai Honor. And in fact, Dubai Honor running on Sunday in Hong Kong in a race worth a cool, well, just short of £3 million. Last but not least, we've got Lucinda Simms, Cindy, as she's better known, an international showing judge, well, a much admired side saddle rider and instructor as well. She's competed for Great Britain and has produced a number of advanced event horses as well as a prize-winning line of show ponies and former racehorses. Among those former racehorses in her care is the brilliant former Paul Nicholls inmate Grade 1 winning hurdler Canter, who was recently seen parading at Cheltenham and Newbury, and actually has been ridden side saddle more often than not these days by Cindy's daughter, Olivia. So thank you to all 3 of you for your time this evening. It's absolutely great to have you with us. I'm sure everybody at home is going to find this really useful, and your expertise, hopefully we'll get through quite a lot of it through this webinar. As always, the webinars are for you. We must, before we go any further, thank the Levy Board, who have helped make this webinar and the other 3 we're running this winter possible. And as always, before I shut up and we start to move on, just a reminder that you can take part. Your questions and answers, hopefully you're going to take quite a bit of this webinar. So submit your questions, as always, in the Q&A section. We'll get to as many as we can. We may not get to all of them, but we will try and follow up afterwards by email if we don't answer all of them online. So that's the introduction to our guests, and that's how to get involved. And to kick things off, we're going to just have a look at a short video, which is just making a quick comparison really between a horse just out of training and one that's further on in the journey, because this webinar really is all about filling those gaps. All the horses you're going to see in this video, they are all ex-flat, apart from one, Torolite, who ran on the flat and over hurdles. And in this video as well, I believe we've got Miss You Pete and Shipping Forecast, which are 2 horses that many of you may well be familiar with. So we'll have a look at this video and then we'll get back to our panel.
It's a wonderful opportunity here to demonstrate the difference between a horse who's just come out of training, who is still very unsettled in his mouth, is a little bit all over the place with his head, to a horse that is more educated because it's been out of training a bit further and is more used to working in a shape. This is a real good example here of a horse just out of training, as we said before, with its head up in the air a little bit, and then something that has learned to work more into a shape, arching its head and neck and working a little bit more like a dressage horse.
Okay, so just a real basic and a very quick introduction there into where we're sort of going with this webinar and our thinking on this, about that journey from getting the horse straight out of training and obviously making that journey, which for some will be quicker than others, and for some it will be easier, and for others it might be a little bit more eventful. But that's just a good start and a good introduction. So thank you to Yogi for his work on that video. I think a good place to start, actually, and we'll start with Yogi, but just to each of you, just maybe a couple of thoughts about when you take on a new horse out of training, any things that people should be considering in those first hours and days when that horse arrives from the trainer. So Yogi, to you first on that.
But I think it's like any new horse that one gets into one's yard. It's important to find out as much as possible about the horse. I don't think it's a bad thing to contact the trainer and get a few ideas from him what the horse is like, and then naturally study the horse when he comes off the lorry, when he goes into the stable. I think also where the information comes from the trainer is how much time he has had since he ran the last time. What his regime has been just before you get him, because sometimes when a horse is decided to go out of training, the trainer might leave him alone for a while and they might just go on the walker or just be turned out. They might have lost a little bit of fitness, but they might also gain freshness, so they might be a little bit fresher because they've done less work. So you just know a bit where you are starting from, and then I think it's important to make sure that you get the diet right, so you're not overfeeding them, getting them too het up. Of course, in racing, they are fed a lot of high-powered food, and now as a normal riding horse, they need slightly less on that. And then really to start from scratch with them. How do they lead? Can I pick their feet up? Do they tie up? How do they react to various areas? And like any horse that comes into a new environment, it might take a day or two before they actually settle down, and during that time, I would do not so much with them. I think it's interesting, if you're looking at the clip there with the two horses, there was one piece of equipment that I liked that they had, which was a neck strap, because I think that's a good idea when you start riding. We will see a little clip later on about mounting the horse and getting him ready. And of course, if the horse hasn't done so much, we might need to lunge him or work the horse from the ground a little bit before we get on him, and we will see examples of that. But you saw the more educated horse having a noseband on, and the horse that has just come out of training not having a noseband on. Some trainers use nosebands, some horses haven't had it in training. I don't know, Laura, what your take is on having a noseband or not having a noseband straight off like that.
Yeah, I whenever they come to me, they do have a noseband on, but it's very loose, so it's not restrictive. They don't feel restricted by it, and you know, you get an idea as to their reaction to, you know, a loose noseband with a flash, and build from there really. But I think it's really important to take into consideration that when they come to a new yard, that quite often the only other stable that they might have been to would have been on a race course. So they might be for a few days quite het up and thinking that they're going racing. So to bear that in mind, really, that you've got to let them realise that it's different to what they might have maybe anticipated, and to treat, I always say, treat every horse as an individual, and as Yogi said, start from the very beginning. And I always, with all the race horses that come to me, I always treat them like they know absolutely nothing, because the reality is, in what I would call a normal yard and a normal situation, they probably do know nothing, and you can't go far wrong if you treat them like they don't know anything, and anything then is a bonus. But like, from picking their feet out to leading them, tying them up, all of that, you have to think that they probably have never done that. Most racing yards, they're used to being tacked up in their stables and going out with a string of horses. So everything is new for most racehorses coming out of training.
And Laura, I imagine as well, you'd want them to quite quickly get them into the new routine, which perhaps is easier on your yard and maybe even Cindy's yard as well, when it's a little bit more of a sort of professional environment. It might be something that our viewers might need to consider if they're going into a livery yard. They've just got one horse. The routine of the horses around them might be slightly different. And obviously horses coming out of training are coming from a real strict routine. How would you sort of advise people in terms of that routine? How important is their own routine with their new horse?
Yeah, I think forming a new routine for the horses as quickly as possible. Trying to make, obviously everyone's situations are different, but the more routine that you can give to the horse, it makes their life a lot easier to understand what's asked of them. Obviously, if you're on a livery yard with lots of other owners with different horses and things, maybe just making them understand and aware that the new horse might not be used to certain things. So to make sure everyone's aware, so if you're getting on at the same time or riding in the arena at the same time, they're not coming up behind you or riding towards you. That's the kind of things that you have to think. The racehorses aren't used to that situation, riding in a school with other horses other than going nose to tail following. So when horses start going in different directions, or a horse maybe arrives in the arena or leaves the arena, it's all those kind of scenarios that you just need to think ahead and plan ahead and be aware of, and expect it not to go swimmingly straight away until the horse understands that those are normal now. Those situations are the norm. But to be aware that for the horses they might react in different ways, because for them it's very abnormal.
And Cindy, to you, just for your thoughts on hints and tips as well, but also perhaps you can also pick up on that we have to remember that some of these horses, if they're coming straight out of training, they might not have been in the field recently, they might not have had a whole lot of forage recently, so all these kind of things need to be factored in as well, don't they, in those first couple of days?
Yeah, no, they absolutely do. And to back up what Yogi and Laura have said, is that routine is key, absolute key. They've been used to a routine. And I find I had one that's just arrived yesterday, and he's very, very, worried and upset. And it's just being calm and positive around them, making sure that they can see other horses. I think Laura picked up on, if you're going into perhaps a DIY yard, which I'm afraid some of these horses go into, is problems can arise by horses being left perhaps on their own or in a separate field. Horses that have come out of training are used to strings. They're used to lots and lots of other horses around them, so that must be borne in mind. And as you say, the quicker you get them into a routine, the better. I personally, when they've come straight out of training, the change in feed, you've got to be a little bit careful with that because it can upset their tummies. And some of the more highly strung ones can have perhaps be aware of ulcers. I know that's been touched on in previously. So change the feed relatively slowly. And I actually, with all of mine, I tend to let them they go in a field. I've got very lucky, I have an elderly pony that they can hopefully not beat up, but that actually does a very, very, very good job. So if you've got access to an older pony, that's great. There are many, many ways of keeping them calm. Each horse, as Yogi said, you must treat as an individual, completely as an individual. So just be sensible, common sense.
Common sense.
I think that's a very key word in this. Use common sense and study how the horse is reacting to the different steps that you're doing. And like Laura said, don't be afraid of taking not just 1 or 2 steps back, but half a dozen steps back in order to work way slowly. Just as an example, if you don't know whether the horse is used to being turned out, naturally, just within reason, the smaller the pen, the better. Make sure that the fencing is right. Like Lucinda said, that they can see another horse, or if they have the facility to have a companion, and then maybe take the horse out, make sure that you have the right equipment if you're leading the horse around, and lead the horse around the field a few times so they get familiar to what's there, and then stay with the horse when you let the horse loose, so to see how the horse reacts. And if he's nice and settled, fine, you can go away. If he starts running around and so on, there might be a time when you actually have to catch him if you can again and start all over again. So just common sense and observe how the horse is reacting.
Absolutely. Well, a place that many of you might start when you come to progressing to putting the work in with your horse, the groundwork, may well be lunging and long reining. So we're going to lead in now to a video which Yogi is kindly going to talk us through, and this will just introduce a little bit more of the fundamentals of lunging and long reining your former racehorse.
So I think to start out with, it's good to know that the majority of all racehorses, when they go into, when they're being broken in, have been used to being lunged and being long reined. So it's not necessarily something new to them. But again, this is the sort of information one would like to find out before. I don't think it's necessary to neither lunge nor long rein a horse when it has come out of training. But like Lucinda said, if he's come and he's a bit fresh and a bit upset and looking around and so on, if you have the right facilities, a lunge pen and so on, it might not be a bad idea to actually have him on the lunge first to see how he reacts to a new saddle, a new bridle, and all of those things.
And I think, Yogi, just on the saddle you just mentioned there, and we did cover this in the last webinar too, but more from a sort of practical level now. These horses may well not have had the sort of saddle that we're commonly going to be using now in the retraining process, a heavy sort of GP saddle, and that's going to be put on them, and that's going to be all new as well, isn't it? So that's a factor. It
is a factor. The majority of horses wouldn't react at all. Even the race horses that might never had a GP saddle on would not necessarily react. But again, it's using common sense, showing the saddle. I often say that when a horse is new to you, you almost treat him as if he was unbroken to begin with. And then as you discover what he knows and what he's confident in, then you can start moving a little bit quicker. And Cindy, because obviously we're going to bring in your side saddle knowledge as well as we go through this too. How quickly, if you were looking at progressing to that, would that be something you would introduce on a lunge or a long rein, or would that be something that would come down the line in terms of the tack?
No, you always introduce it. You show the horse the saddle, and then you put it on, and always on the lunge. Always on the lunge, and then you put the rider on and off. But I mean, that's a long and a different subject. But I agree with Yogi. All the horses I've had have never objected to any saddle. Actually, a GP saddle. Jumping saddle, and they're all absolutely fine. They're used to so many pads underneath their racing saddles, when they're out on exercise, that I think that's a slight red herring with the saddle issue. Interesting.
And I mean, we spoke last week, there were we had a saddler on last week who was talking, a couple of weeks ago actually, I should say, who was just talking about how as the horse progresses in his work, the musculature frame is going to change, and you may well need to just keep an eye on the saddle fit as you progress.
Absolutely. A lot of them, sorry to jump in, there seems to be a modern thing that, well, not more modern, but we learn more and more that a lot of horses have kissing spine or back issues. So that's something to, obviously bear in mind. And they do change enormously. The little horse that Laura and Yogi taught, Toro Light, that's in my yard, I mean, since the video was taken, he's changed completely, and we've had to find another saddle for him as he, builds up muscle. But he's going very well, but with a wider saddle actually.
And Laura, in terms of how long you would typically look at lunging and long reining, what would your sort of thoughts be in terms of how long people should be looking at lunging their new racehorse, particularly in those early stages?
To be honest, there's no right answer. As we've said all along, every horse is an individual, and you have to play it by ear. If after 5-10 minutes you think that that they're absolutely fine, they're settled with the saddle, and they're relaxed, then progress to getting on them. There's not, you don't want to drill them doing too much lunging. It's just more of to give you an idea as to how they react with a saddle on, and then once you know that they're okay, then you move on to the next stage.
Yogi, anything to add on the lunging and long reining before we progress?
No, again, I think it's very much about taking it step by step. And when we see that short clip here about long reining and so on, it is a matter of being able to have someone to help you along, so that you have someone by the horse's head to begin with. You might even want to have someone lead him around in the circle first, and then gradually see how he takes to the lunging. And the same thing with the long reining, when you start letting the lines coming on both sides of the horse, to have someone holding on to his head, and both with the lunging and with the long reining, to make sure that you are in a facility which is suitable, and that is in a well fenced in area on a good surface. When I mean a good surface, so the horse can't slip over, because obviously with the long reins and the lunging, you're going to be on a tighter circle and on a tighter turn. And just recognize that you wouldn't just put long reins on a horse or try to lunge him in a 40-acre field. You want to have that smaller environment where you can have the control over the horse and gain the control due to having a fence around the outside.
Yeah, the 40-acre field might not end too well. Moving on from there is to an issue, a topic we spoke about last year, and I think Yogi actually joined us for this particular one. We actually talked about mounting, getting on your horse, particularly in those early days, because, and I'm sure many of you that have already been a bit further down this journey have found a lot of these former racehorses clearly are mounted as a rule on the move. They're legged up and off they go. So this can sometimes be an area which produces something of a stumbling block for some people. So before we talk about mounting and any factors that we need to consider, we'll just have a little look at this clip, which tells us a little bit more.
Okay, yeah. On 3? On 1. Go.
Now, so like a lot of racehorses, this horse here wanted to move away, straight away, and I actually moved with him rather than restraining him to begin with, because in the racing yards they're often used to just walking on when they are out like that. So then we just stop him here, say good boy, and if you wouldn't mind just jumping off again, and we'll ask Laura to give you a leg up again, and this time I'm going to ask him to stand still. So this time I stand a little bit more in front of him, and we stand still and we say well done, good boy. That's it, very good boy. And then we are going to do the same thing off the mounting block. So this can be a little bit of a worry for them to begin with. You can see he just moved himself away, so I'm just straightening him out, and then you can...
Shall I put my foot in the stirrup?
Yes, please. Now he's behaving very, very well, but again you saw he just wanted to move off a step as you get on, and I didn't straight away say don't. I was quite happy to move with him so that he knows that he's not going to be overly restrained, but we are still controlling. That's it, again, he moved his bottom over a little bit, so we just straighten him out. Can you reach?
Yeah.
This time I'm going to make him stand. You stand that. That's it. Good boy. That's it. Clever boy. When I said stand still, he just a little bit looked back at me and he just got a little bit fidgety about it. And then I patted him and then he relaxed. Good. And then see if he will do it all on his own. Good boy. So you can see here Sophie stood him up. That's it. Good.
You make it look very easy, Yogi, there. And we'll start with you, Yogi, because you again kindly voiced over that video for us. Obviously, you got some pretty good results there relatively quickly. Obviously, it's going to vary according to the horse and according to the rider, but any sort of tips that you would think people watching this should bear in mind when it comes to starting mounting? I imagine it's just take very small steps.
Absolutely. Take very small steps and make sure that you are in a safe environment, so you're not right out in the middle of the yard and everything is open and maybe on concrete and so on. Take your mounting block, even if you go into a lunching pen or whatever. You could see that I had helpers, so we had one person holding on, one person giving a leg up. Yes, you could get away with one person only. If you have asked your helpers to come in, I do think it's a good idea and looked upon as the right way to actually for them to wear a crash helmet as a safety precaution in case the horse should play up and mess around. And you saw also that I looped the rope through the bit ring rather than hook it on. And I often do that, particularly with young horses or horses I don't know, so that if they should run away or I'm in a situation where I can't hold on to them anymore and they run away, they don't run with a line hanging off them and getting in between their legs, but they actually get free from the line. Yeah. They're very much doing it step by step and in a calm, nice environment and just, and if they react in a bad way, you might have to take a few steps back again and then move forward and then take a few steps back again.
And Laura, it's also about rewarding and be mindful about your body language, isn't it, to the horse as well, and just making sure you're rewarding when you get the the response that you want. So when we saw Yogi in that clip, when the horse was moving forward, he didn't want to. He applied the pressure to ask him to stand still again, but then he was very quick to take the pressure off as soon as he got the the desired response, and that's quite important to keep in mind, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean that's key, really. These horses, they need to understand what's right and wrong and praise them as soon as they do the right thing. I've also found sometimes if you have a slightly tricky one to get on, that to have a treat or something, a bit of carrot, a bit of apple, a mint or something, so that they think that standing by the mountain block is a nice place to be and that they get rewarded for standing there. And once they've got used to standing and taking a treat, well then you can start by trying to get on and then give them, it's kind of a little bit like a distraction for them. It takes their mind off if they're a bit worried about the rider getting on. If they've got a bit of food to think about, then they think about that and focus on that more than the rider, and it's a way of just distracting them and it being a nice process rather than having to be too forceful trying to make them stand still. So I think that's also something to bear in mind if a horse is getting agitated for standing still or gets a bit worried about the rider mounting from the mountain block, then that's another way of doing it to keep them happy.
And Cindy, one of the advantages here, these horses, thoroughbreds particularly, generally anyway, tend to have quite a quick brain. They do learn very quickly, which can be a bad thing sometimes. But on the whole, that can be used in our favour here, can't it?
Absolutely, 100%. And I completely reiterate what Yogi and Laura says, particularly Laura with the sweeties. As I do still ride, but old eventing injuries means I have two metal knees and I'm not very fast. And so all the horses, I do spend a lot of time standing, feed, standing, feed, turning, moving. The other thing I will say, great tip for not just mounting, but just generally as a reward, particularly if you're riding, is I will always go to them and scratch their withers. It's like a mutual grooming, and I find that is really key. All of them expect a really nice scratch. You can use that as well as a treat. And another of the horses that we have is ridden by a thoroughbred horse who is a high goal polo pony, and it's been retrained as a therapy horse. And we spent a long time teaching her to stand by the mounting block. And we did it. She wasn't interested in polos. She wasn't interested in any of the sweeties. And it was scratching, just scratching. She just goes to sleep, melted. And the other thing I do say, particularly if you are a bit older, a bit more disabled, and there are people, that still ride, is actually have a high mounting block, quite a high one, so you're not pulling on the saddle. And also, if we've got one that's a little bit worried, I always say, just go in a light seat. Don't flop into the saddle and go bash, because all that lovely patient work that you've done, you're going to undo as somebody hits the saddle and they go, Christ, what was that? And shoot off. So careful. But exactly as Yogi and Laura said, it's patience, time. Lots of scratching on the withers.
Scratching on the withers. Great advice. Thank you very much, all three of you. So we're going to move on a little bit more now into flat work, and we're going to watch another clip now. And this one is, I believe, from Laura, who's going to give us some advice to a rider of a horse that's 2 weeks out of training. And I think Yogi is going to be helping a rider in this video that is 6 weeks out of training. Let's have a watch.
That's it. And then I would do a little circle in the corner, just so that, again, you're practicing the steering. They're not used to really turning. They're used to following a horse and going in a pretty much straight line. So it's good to just in the walk do the very basics and just make sure that you're in control and that they understand that they've got to go where you want them to go. That's it. And then I do another halt there.
The only thing I want him to do is to turn, and like I said to Rosanna, to just turn with a very gentle guiding hand. Yes, use a little bit of leg if he stops up too much, but other than that, just leave him alone quite a bit with the leg, because he hasn't really learned what the leg is all about as yet. And now, as he starts to round, also feel if you can get him to start stretching out a little bit. You can gently ask him to work a little bit more forward. That's it. Good.
Thank you again to Laura and Yogi for voicing those videos for us. So we saw two horses there. Laura, I'll come to you first on this one, because at the beginning of that video, you discussed and you mentioned how a lot of these racehorses are used to going in a straight line, following another horse. That is a factor, isn't it? Thinking about a lot of horses, like humans, will favour left or right, but particularly in racing, we often find, particularly some of our jumpers, they actually stick to left-handed tracks or right-handed tracks. That's a factor, isn't it, when you start this work to get the horse to turn, because they're going to perhaps have a very clear favoured direction.
Yeah, definitely. And starting in walk where you've got a bit more control, you very quickly learn they'll turn one way easier than the other, they'll bend one way easier than the other, they might fall in, they might fall out, and it just gives you a real clear guide as to which way they favour and what their weaknesses and strengths are, and as to what you're going to need to work on the most. So it's really important to get a baseline of where you're at with the horse and what their preferred way of going is, so that you know what you've got to work with.
And Cindy, do you find that the horses you've had over the years have shown a particular preference more often than not, left or right, in when you've had them from the racetrack?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think all horses are left, you know, they're like us, they're sort of left-handed or right-handed. But yeah, no, they're always stiffer one way or the other. And another little tip that when we're hacking, because we do a lot of hacking initially, is if you have a trot, lots of people don't like trotting on the roads, but you know, if you have a little trot, and also when you're in the arena, change diagonal quite a lot, you know, particularly you know, when we're on the roads. If we are trotting or on the verges and things, we do a lot of changing diagonals, and horses will always throw you back onto the diagonal that they're more comfortable on. But yeah, no, they are generally, yeah, very stiff actually. And of course they are used to going in straight lines. They're not used to going, as Yogi and Laura said, they're not used to going around smaller corners, tighter corners. They're not used to legs. You know, they don't understand what a leg aid is. Again, just time and patience, and you know, you chip away at it, and you know, they pick it up very quickly. You know, let's not forget, thoroughbreds are, I'm afraid, in my opinion, the brightest of all the equine breeds, and they do pick up things, good and bad habits, very quickly.
I think we definitely all agree on that. Yogi, in the horse you were training in that video, you were talking about just a very basic turn to the right we saw in that example. When you start to bring in turns and circles for these former racehorses, I think what our listeners might want to know quite in a sort of basic sense is what sort of aids would you be looking at to apply? Because clearly we you know, in those very early days, it might not be a case of with other normal riding horses, we might have a particular set of aids which they'd be more used to. We might find the aids initially don't work quite the same on our former racehorses.
Well, to me, it's the important thing is to establish the brakes first of all, and then to establish the steering, and then to establish the accelerator. And as you saw with Laura there, when she worked the horse in walk to begin with, she asked the rider to stop the horse, and then she turned one way, and then she turned the other way. And yes, a lot of the racehorses, they might not understand the aids just exactly like we are doing with the normal riding horse, but they have an idea about that. When the leg is used, you should go forward, and when you apply pressure on the mouth, they should come back. And if you guide or take with your right hand, you turn right, and the same when you turn left. It is starting to introduce them more to work from the leg to the hand, and accepting and keeping their balance through the turns. That is the beginning to that schooling that we are doing. And when I did with the exercise, where I asked them to just turn a lot from one way to the other, was simply that the horse came in rather fresh in the school, wanted to trot away all the time, and by turning, you break that forward motion in the horse, and the horse has to rebalance itself. It has to think about something else than just go faster in a straight line. And gradually the horse will then start settling down, and once it settles down, the horse will start listening more to the rider's aid and instruction. I think an important point here is that if you are applying pressure with your hand towards the horse's mouth, and the horse goes against it, you might actually have to release and then come again, and release and then come again several times before the horse understands, rather than just creating a tug of war between yourself and the horse's mouth. And that goes both for when you want to slow down and when you want to steer. And of course, like Lucinda was saying, that if you do change direction a lot and you change the diagonal each time, you have that motion when you go from one diagonal to another with them. And it comes down to general education. Interesting, though, I was in a racing yard in Newmarket not so long ago, and they actually had 2-year-olds hacking through town and onto the heath, and then they were cantering in a straight line for about 4 or 5 furlongs, and then when they pulled up on the way back to where they came from, all of them had to trot, and rather than to go in a string, they had to trot in serpentines, but not serpentines following each other, but serpentines individually, even though they were in a string. And I thought it was a great idea and a very good way of teaching these very inexperienced horses, who are not quite 2 years of age as yet, just basic steering. And if that, a lot of trainers do actually spend time on doing that. So when we do come to retrain them, they are actually just reminded about things that they actually did before they became a racing machine and going on the racetrack.
Absolutely. We're going to move on to another clip now, and this one involves Yogi working with a 4-year-old gelding who's been out of training for 6 weeks. In this video, we're going to look at the balance that a rider needs to find in getting their thoroughbred to move forward. Let's have a watch.
When the opportunity is there, ride him forward. But if you feel that he is getting very steppy, then just slightly slow him down so that he finds a slower rhythm to go in. So steady him a little bit there. A little bit, that's it. Steady, 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 steady. Good, good. Now come forward. Now come forward. There. There. Good. Good, good. Now, yep. As soon as you feel that moment when he drops his head and neck, look after the contact, but ride him gently forward. When he comes back up, then just steady. That's it. Good there. There. Good. What I like here, compared to when you got on him earlier, now he's walking around. He's quite, if anything, he's almost a little bit lazy there. And that's when I say, don't sit and grind the leg. Keep the leg still and then a little kick. A leg still and then a little kick. So he learns to go for the leg rather than go against the leg.
Okay, so Yogi, again, thank you for voicing that clip for us. You mentioned about just almost rewarding just that slight reaction, which we could see there, where the horse just relaxed and almost looked as if he was offering almost the start of what eventually might be a long and low, more relaxed frame. How important is that, just to spend time and just try and just reward almost just that, even the slightest relaxation of the neck, and when you're doing those early bits of trot work?
I mean, all riding of horses is about balance and rhythm. And of course, in racing, trotting is usually used just to warm the horses up for the canter work and the galloping work that they are doing. And generally speaking, in with racehorses, they learn to trot fairly quick. And when I say quick, it means that their legs are moving quite quick, rather than that they are finding a rhythm in that trot. And so to begin with, as you saw in that clip, I asked the rider to slow the horse down so that he found a balance and a rhythm where we could then ask him to go forward. And then as soon as he had that, he started to relax and he started to accept the contact and he started to bring his head and neck down. And then it's easier for him to understand the forward leg as you go along with that. But that is how, to me, where you start that sort of dressage moment with the horses. But both Laura and Lucinda has taken so many horses through those stages as well. So let's hear what they've got to say.
Yes. Cindy, have you got a particular routine? I'll ask Cindy and Laura actually this. Is there a particular routine or a method that you use early on to encourage that relaxation and that rhythm?
Funny enough, it was something somebody said to me once, is because as Yogi says, they trot quite quickly, they're quite busy in their trot. And, we're looking for them to soften, to take the contact down and forwards a little bit more and engage, and is to slow your breathing. Actually breathe much slower, breathe in rhythm, and, calm your thoughts down and be very, 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 we forget actually that we can influence the horse by being tense and worried, or tense and sort of, oh, he's not going well, or, so just calm that down, and also slow the trot, slow your rising down in the trot. A lot of the trainers, particularly the lot of the good trainers, particularly, I'm thinking more a little bit jumping. There's one trainer in particular who makes sure that their horses actually don't rush about, and they are actually they have to canter on the right leads and that sort of thing. And when I'm starting them as well, particularly if I'm starting with a pupil, is I will put poles out, because it gives, or if you're working, you know, in an arena and there's some jumps, to work round, it gives them a point of reference, you know, make a circle around that fence, or make a circle over that pole, or go between those poles, because it gives them, they don't get so lost, they can then focus. And that also, I find, does settle a more tense horse, shall we say. But, you know, it was lovely to see how Yogi worked with that, you know, quite a buzzy, tense horse who hadn't been so long out of training. And it was wonderful to see how he was starting to take the contact forward and soften. So, you know, very impressive.
Excellent. Laura, to you.
Yeah, just slowing everything down, loads of half halts, but I would say half halt and soften, so the horse doesn't feel restricted by you slowing him down. It's about doing a half halt, slowing him down, then rewarding him for slowing down, and just getting him to switch off and relax within the steadier, more collected trot, so that then hopefully then they relax in their head and neck, and it's once they've done that you can then ride them forwards. But you need to react very quickly that when you ride them forwards, if it's that they've gone fast rather than just forwards, if they go faster again, then it's just repetition, slowing it down, relaxing them, then allowing them to come forwards rather than them rushing and it being a faster trot. It should be that you want their stride to be longer and slower rather than shorter and quicker, but it's repetition. And I find throwing in some transitions, some trot walk trot transitions, so that it is just taking the edge off them and just slowing everything down, and just giving them letting them give themselves the time to trot in a more slower forward way. But it's a lot of, I always like to give them lots of pats with the inside hand, just because as much as anything, it's a reminder to the rider not to just be hanging on. Once you give them a pat, you've released the contact, and that in itself kind of relaxes them.
Okay, excellent advice. Thank you very much, all three of you. We're going to move on a little bit further into the journey now, because next up, the next video we're going to see is a horse that is 5 months out of training. So we'll be able to see, hopefully, where progress has been made compared to those videos that we saw a little bit earlier on.
We actually really like him. And we didn't feel that, yes, he's a little bit mouthy, but we didn't feel that he was overly so. And what we felt here was that could possibly get to go forward a bit more, and that might well solve that.
Don't change anything too much like you've been doing. Really nice riding him into that nice level contact, but just try and encourage him just to be a little bit more forward. So just feel like once you've got the balance and a nice contact, then softly allow him forwards and encourage him forwards without chasing him. So forward, not fast. So just pick up the trot again there. That's it. So there, when you feel like he just drops there onto the contact, just squeeze a little bit more leg, and equally there where he's just dropping back a bit, just put a little bit more leg on and encourage him forwards. That's it. And then as soon as you feel him go forwards, then you can back off with the leg. And then if you feel him drop you again, then ride him forwards. That's it. And keep thinking there, that's good. Keep thinking every time that you feel him soften onto the contact, you soften the contact. Don't throw it away, but just almost feel like you release the fingers a little bit so that he understands that that's a nice place. Good. So again, if you feel that he comes up in the contact, like away from the contact, a little bit more leg, a little bit more contact to produce more connection. And then when he drops his head, then you soften and release. That's it. Good. Good. That's better. Good there.
Okay, so we'll start this time with Cindy, because this is a horse Torolite that you know very, very well indeed, isn't it, Cindy? So tell us a little bit about this horse's background and how he progressed in the time that you've seen him since he left training.
So little Toro, he's tiny actually. He's only 15.1. He was with Nicky Henderson in a syndicate. He then went to Toby Lawes. He started off on the flat with Richard Hughes. He's obviously very flat. He's flatbred by Tornado out of a Medicean mare. And he came to me with his wonderful owner, Sharon, who, and she had got it, she was in the syndicate that had him in training. And so she's taken him on from the syndicate. He did have, before he had a couple of months in a field before he came to me. I have to say it's not something I personally do. I think we keep referring all the time to routine, and I don't know that it does suit all of them, but because I tend to keep the ones that have come straight from training to me, we sort of tick them over and we teach them about the field, but we do keep them just sort of doing a little bit. They don't have to work particularly hard. Anyway, Toro has got a fabulous temperament. I think both Laura and Yogi will agree. He's got very nice basic paces with, I think, a beautiful walk, a really, really lovely walk. He has got this super temperament. I mean, really very easy temperament, but he wasn't in brilliant condition. I do find that unless you keep feeding them, they can, it's a weird word to use, but melt. The condition can come off them quite quickly. And he wasn't in the best of condition, and his teeth were not brilliant. Again, that's how it is sometimes. Since his teeth have been done, he has realized that his mouth doesn't hurt. He started to put on condition. His contact has improved as he's gained confidence. And he and Sharon they're just flying. They came away Sharon came away from her lesson with Yogi and Laura just buzzing. And so thank you very much, both of you. We've been building on that. I have got the privileged position of having a small indoor arena, which is much bigger than a lunge pen, but it's smaller than a 40 by 20. And we do loose school. All our horses are loose schooled. And Toro has definitely improved and strengthened by doing certainly 3 sessions a week, loose schooling. And we vary it, all his work. Sharon hacks him. And he's a bold little horse because he hacks on his own, which is wonderful, because Sharon has he comes very early in the morning sometimes and has to be at work. So she takes him off around my farm, hacking on her own. First few times, heart in my mouth, oh my God. And she said, no, he's fine, because she's got that lovely attitude. Her horse has got a lovely attitude. Anyway, I'd love Laura to see him again because he really has improved, and his trot's got bigger and stronger, and he's taking a much more consistent contact. His canter work is improving. I always start everybody, and I think Laura will agree, I do start in a light seat because that's what they're used to. They're not used to having somebody sitting upright, bolt upright, driving them, so to speak, with their seat bones. So we start in a light seat, lots of transitions. And I don't know whether it's something we do, is we do a lot from the voice, an awful lot from the voice. I know you're not allowed to in the dressage, but we use the voice because we do a lot of loose schooling and because we do a lot of lunging and long reining. They're used to the voice, and it's a very good tool and a very good aid. And he's progressing with his jumping, he's progressing with his grids. slightly different because he was a hurdler. He did rush. I know Laura and Yogi didn't see him jump, but he just wanted to hurdle. So we brought that right back to teaching. It's like teaching a baby to jump. We've done all that from the beginning, and that, funny enough, little poles and grids has really strengthened him and helped him with his flat work. So
Excellent.
great.
Excellent. Well, he's got a lovely walk for sure. That's exactly what I thought when I actually watched that clip earlier on today as well. He's got a fabulous walk. We'll come back to Yogi and Laura shortly, but I know time's a little bit against us. So let's have a look at Toro now in the Canter. So we've got another video for you. Have a look at this.
And then when you're ready, you can pop him into Canter. And to start with, I would ride him a little bit more forward and maybe in a bit of a half seat canter. That's it. So just almost stand up in the stirrups a little bit. That's it. You can shorten your reins a little bit there. So with racehorses, once they've come out of training, they don't really know about cantering slowly and in a balance. So to start with, you just let them take slightly longer strides, and it's easier for them if you're slightly off their back. That's it. And then you can just keep encouraging him forward. That's it. Good. Now you can think about sitting into the saddle. That's it. And just let him find his balance. You keep using your legs to help him stay forward. That's it. Very good. Now think balance and back to the trot. Little half halt. Half halt. Now soft. Good. That's it.
Yeah, it's an absolutely lovely horse, Cindy. Laura, just back to you, because I think that was quite interesting when the rider in the video there picked up the canter, and you actually said just to start off in that half seat and then progress to sitting in the saddle. How often would you take that approach with the former racehorses? Would it be something you would do pretty customary with the horses as they start cantering?
Yeah, all the time. And I sometimes can stay off their back for a good week, 10 days, until I feel like they've established being able to canter in a small space. A lot of them aren't used to being in a small arena. They're only used to going on a gallop, and obviously galloping. So it depends how long I feel that they need, but yeah, always start them off out of the saddle. I feel like you can get them to relax more by being off their back. Let them find a balance going around a smaller space, and once you feel like they've found their balance, that's when I'll then sit and encourage them to work with the weight of the rider as well in a different balance. You have to remember that with the racehorses coming off the track, that you're completely changing their balance and what they're used to, and it is a slow process. Some get it a lot quicker than others. I have actually found that with the flat horses, they seem to find it a lot easier cantering slower. They probably have slightly shorter, quicker strides anyway compared to the national hunt horses. That's just something that I found. Definitely all the flat horses that I've had have found it very easy to canter in a small space compared to the national hunt horses. So it's very much just, again, reading the horse and reacting to each horse as the individual. And you couldn't say, after 1 session, 2 sessions, 10 sessions. It's about, reading when the horse is ready for you to sit and ask that bit more collection from them.
Okay, just very briefly, Yogi, how important is it to nail all of the other paces first, the walk and trot, I'm thinking, before obviously progressing into canter, or would you not worry too much about perfecting each pace and just sort of working on things gradually?
Well, it's like with every horse that you're working with, you find the pace where the horse finds it the easiest. And of course, in walk, providing that the horse is not too fresh and wanting to jig and get on with it too much, the horse, you have got more time the horse, it's easier for him to balance because it's a 4-time movement, so he only moves one leg at a time. The trot, you have got a 2-time movement, so he's got 2 legs in the ground. But in the canter, of course, he has that moment when he is airborne, which makes it a little bit more difficult for him in that sort of way. But I think to just underline the importance here of what both Lucinda and Laura was saying, then when they start introducing these aids and using the legs, like Laura said, keep the leg still and then give him a little nudge with the leg, and then keep the leg still and give him a little nudge with the leg. And this is where, to me, one can back it up with your voice. So rather than just grinding away with the leg and kicking harder and grinding away, which to me teaches the horse to ignore the leg, you use the leg little but short and sharp. And then if he doesn't listen to it, back it up with the clicking of the voice, just like that. And the same thing when you're using the hand. If he doesn't quite take to the hand, just go woo and steady him. Like Lucinda was saying, if you work the horses a lot from the ground, they will learn the words trot and canter, and one can then use those things to get them in. And of course, again, seeing where the horse is coming, if you're getting a horse off the flat, then he's often younger. He might only be 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. So the racing hasn't been established as much as if you're getting a 10, 12-year-old horse that has been running over fences for a long period of time, where he's more established as a racehorse. And that's why it might take a little bit longer for that horse to re-skills, whilst a younger horse can pick it up much quicker.
Absolutely. We're going to go to the final clip now, because I'm just aware I want to get some of the Q&As in as well before we finish up tonight. But this final clip combines coaching from Laura and Yogi. And you'll see here that the patience and hard work really is paying off. The horse, just for interest, is shipping Forecast. He's a 7-year-old, 4 years out of training. One on the track as a 2-year-old, but a fractured pelvis curtailed his racing career. Prior to this day of filming, he'd actually competed in his first dressage competition and had won a prelim class and picked up a placing in a novice class. So let's just have a look at this.
Ride that canter gently forward. Good. A little bit more forwards again. Just use your seat and legs to encourage him forwards there. That's good. A little play and soften to the right again. Good. Now balance and back to the trot.
Should we just see him into trot again? Because I thought now he started to relax a little bit more in his trot stride there. There. So you're always working on establishing a good rhythm in him. That is connected with his acceptance of the contact. Just flex him a little bit to the right there again. Good. There. Now let him walk on or trot on. Come forward. That's it. And a little bit more. A little bit stronger. A little bit stronger. That's it. Good. There. Very good. Very good. Very good. And come forward. And come forward. And come forward. That's it. Good. Good. And then you can walk. Whoa.
So I think there, Yogi, what was quite interesting was clearly that horse, the journey has progressed a lot further and that horse is much more established, but still you're revisiting, as we do in all disciplines, to be fair, but revisiting those basics, aren't you? Because clearly the traits of the thoroughbred might just mean that there is just the odd little issue that pops up that you just have to remind yourself of those fundamentals.
Yes, it is, like we have said several times here, about taking 1 or 2 steps back to then move forward again, and to all the time look for that basics and establish the basic. But I think these clips here has very much demonstrated the importance of finding the balance and the rhythm first, and then, like with this horse who had already found the balance and rhythm, you then start riding the horse forward and get the horse to move forward in this balance and rhythm. If you lose the balance and rhythm, you have to re-establish and then get the horse to go forward again, because the ultimate end which you are looking for is that the horse can work into an established contact, in a rhythm, in a forward motion, whether it's being walk, trot or canter. So in balance and rhythm, forward. And then once they have established that and terms, then you can start adding things like leg yielding, shoulder ins, and various other movements into what you're doing with the horse to teach him the various movements that he needs for whatever level one wants to develop him onto competition-wise. But you can then also use those movements as part of the suppleness through his body and getting the horse to be more and more flexible down his sides, etc. So you kind of go down through these scales of training, which starts with the rhythm and the contact and the suppleness and the connection and the collection and those sort of things before you can start getting the final article.
And Laura, that's something, to be fair, isn't it, that really we can apply to all breeds of horse, whether it's one of your eventers at home, maybe that isn't a full thoroughbred. You're always sort of reminding yourself perhaps of those basics, but it is in this instance perhaps more important, but you are always sort of just reminding yourself of the basics, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely. That's not really related to a race, retraining a racehorse. That's training any horse. If you haven't got the basics right, you can't, progress any further up the levels and improve them. You've got to have the basics, and it's right every day that I'm riding. Those are the key things that I make sure I've got right before I start thinking about anything else. And you've always got it in the back of your head as well. As you're starting to introduce new movements, you go back to those basics in everything that you do. So yeah, they're the real key things to focus on and to always have in the back of your mind.
And Cindy, just before we go to the Q&As, obviously your experience and expertise with side saddle, how similar is what we're talking about here? How often, is there any similarities? Are there any differences when it comes to training a horse under side saddle?
Lots of similarities. Lots of people say, oh, you've got to train your horse to take a side saddle. Any horse with basic good manners that can walk, trot and canter on both reins can take a side saddle. And in fact, we have it's a known fact that lazy horses or very sharp horses can go far better side saddle than cross saddle, because the essence of side saddle is to sit completely quiet and still, and you basically don't use your leg. I mean, yes, obviously you do use your leg a little bit, but as Yogi was referring to, we want our horses to be quite quick off the leg, not bang, 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 white noise. And with side saddle, if you use your leg, because you've only got one leg, you end up with, it doesn't matter how trained or untrained your horse is, you'll end up in travers to the right all the time, because your left leg is driving it right-handed. So your leg is off your horse and it refines the aids. And horses that are very hot can go very, very well side saddle, because you have to sit very quiet and very still, and you can't bully a horse side saddle. So it can, and it suits thoroughbreds really, really, really well. Toro Light has already had a saddle on, and you just do 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there, but it's like all training: patience, time, repetition. As Laura said, repetition, 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 and keep it consistency along with the routine. So side saddle, actually, thoroughbred horses, they look gorgeous anyway, but they look particularly gorgeous side saddle, and they suit side saddle because you can't nag them and bully them. And interestingly, just as an aside, I notice a lot of, when you're watching racing clips, a lot of the lads coming back from the gallops, they're going into the yard and their legs, and I'm fascinated by this, they're going bang, 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 bang on their horses' sides. And I'm thinking, goodness, interesting. So there we go. That's perhaps something Yogi can take up with some of the trainers, make their lads keep their legs a little bit stiller.
Already done in those places where I go, and I totally agree. It's a habit that I have to work on a lot with people that are riding in racing, and they also like to bring their leg back, and they kind of hit the rib cage as if they were knocking on a barrel, instead of having the leg nicely forward and using it to good effect.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. Right, I'm going to jump into these Q&As as quickly as we can, but there's a couple of really good questions actually, which I think will help just give some general information. Yogi, first one for you is from Katrina. She's wondering if we have any advice we can give her. She's got an ex-racer which came out of training in January 2020, so nearly 2 years ago. Was in another home, and then this lady has picked him up since then. So there's been a little bit of retraining that's been done along the way. However, has become very unaccepting of the legs. So we've spoke quite a bit in this webinar about horses wanting to go forward and controlling the speed. But this is clearly a common problem too, isn't it, Yogi, where we actually may have a horse that doesn't want to go forward. And how would you best address this? All, I should say, back, tack, teeth, ulcers, all checked.
Great. So again, the first thing one has to recognize is the horse, because you can have horses that goes forward, that is rushing, that is pulling and going, and they are still ignoring the leg. If it is the horse is lazy and he's not going at all, in other words, if you didn't do anything at all with the leg, the horse was basically stop up, then you have to teach the horse to actually react to the leg. And number one is that you use the leg in a forward position, because I believe the horse is more sensitive there. I sometimes even ask the rider to turn the knee and the foot out a little to get the heel to the horse at the girth, or even just in front of the girth. Use the leg light with a short, sharper sort of kick rather than a strong bang of the leg. And then use the voice at the same time, so you click. If the horse doesn't react to this, then one might need to have a friendly stick and just back the voice and the stick up with, or the leg and the stick up with a little tap with the stick behind the leg. This is where the work on the ground comes in, because if you're lunging a horse and you are using the lunge whip as a substitute for the leg when you're riding, so the lunge whip is pointing towards the horse's hindquarters, and then you have the lunge line coming into the contact, and you are using your voice. And if the horse doesn't react to the clicking of that voice on the lunge, you make a little sound with the lunge whip. You might not even have to touch him. You just crack the lunge whip till the horse starts reacting to the sound. And horses are creatures of habit. So if they learn to react to the voice, you can then take that with you onto your riding. And that way you can get the horse to start respecting the leg by using the voice at the same time as you are using your leg. The other thing is to recognize that with those horses, you want to keep their work interesting. So you want to keep it varied. A lot of transitions, you slow them down and then make them go forward for the leg, rather than just keeping to an even pace. And sometimes even maybe give them a lead horse, or have a horse beside them, and use the leg when the other horse is about to trot away, so the horse gets that to tempt him to actually move and learn to go from the leg.
And Yogi, just briefly as well, it's so important, isn't it, to reward the response. So even if it's just a very small response of going forward, just to make sure, a little bit in line with what Cindy was saying, this sort of nagging at the sides, they can almost become desensitized if they're never getting a reward, or they're never getting you backing off them. You want to make sure you're rewarding even the slightest.
Thank you very much, Mark, for reminding me about the most important thing in the process. I forgot to say, absolutely. As soon as the horse then reacts to the voice or the leg, or both together, give them a pat. Or like Laura said, she often moves one hand forward and pats with that. And that leads to that you're actually patting them quite high up, which links up with Lucinda's gentle scratching of the withers. Sometimes just a little pat, a little scratch like that, or even using the voice and say good, etc.
Excellent, thank you. Laura, one for you. This one's a little bit about a young horse that has been retrained for dressage, come off the flat, I believe. Doing very well in his retraining, but getting quite tense when he's in a group setting. So warm-up arenas, group lessons, that sort of thing. How would you, if you've got any tips and advice that you would give this Anna-Marie on how she can just keep things calm and on track?
Yeah, I'd almost make sure do a lot of work at home in an environment that he's comfortable with. Start introducing other horses, one other horse till he gets used to that, and then a couple of other horses, just so that you take away from it, you know, the scenario of being away from home, plus with a lot of other horses. So first of all, get him used to being okay with lots of other horses in his home environment, and then go somewhere, maybe hire an arena, and go with just one other horse and build up. So it's all a process, done very slowly, and rather than just completely going in at the deep end, a new arena with lots of other horses and a buzzy environment if it's a competition, so that, you know, you start, as we said the whole way along, you start from the basics and build up. So I would say home environment, one other horse, slowly build up to several other horses, then go away to a new environment with one other horse, build up to several other horses before you go to a competition environment where you've got lots of other horses in the warm-up area.
Well, you asked the right person there, Mark, because if I remember right, London 52, who you mentioned earlier, was actually quite shy with other horses when he first started out on his event in Korea. And just to add to what Laura was saying, to see how the horse is reacting, and if he is very shy with horses coming towards him, when you come into the warm-up area, just ask the other riders to leave you a little bit of space, make sure that they don't come towards you too much, etc. And hopefully they will be friendly enough to oblige with that and actually help you rather than work against you.
I'd like to ask Laura to name some of the event riders that might not have been so friendly or accommodating in the warm-up arenas, but we won't get into who's nice to ride with and who's not. Lucinda, this is one for you, please. Kate Welsh has asked whether you favour a particular type of bit or mouthpiece when you first start things off with a brand new horse.
No, I again, referring to Yogi, I find out from the trainer what the horse has been running in. A little bit of trial and error, start with a very simple, very simple bit, you know, perhaps a hollow mouth, loose ring. To help with the steering, sorry, the puppy needed to go out, which is why I fled for a second. I will start with a loose French link with cheek pieces. I don't know why, it suits me, it suits my riding, it suits the way my hands, my contact. Nearly all my horses go in that and are very happy in that. There's no right or wrong. Toro Light, as you notice, goes in a little rubber plasticky snaffle, but with cheeks. I do like cheek pieces. That's just again a personal preference. Basically, advice from the dentist. Actually, they can advise you on, you know, the width of the horses, the bars, the tongue, that sort of thing, and what they would advise. But it again, start it simple. You know, keep it as simple as possible. I don't know what Laura and Yogi think, but yeah, I do like cheek pieces on a lot of them. For, you know, it does help with steerage.
Yeah. Okay. Just briefly, Laura, on that bitting.
I'd be very much in the same camp as Lucinda there. Cheek pieces with a French link, or a loose ring with a French link. Just think that the horses really prefer a French link to just a single joint. I think it's a bit softer and sits better in their mouth. And again, with a slightly less experienced horse, then the cheek pieces help with steering. So yeah, everything that Cindy said there, I'd agree with.
Yogi, as well to you on that.
Nothing to add more than, of course, a lot of racehorses are ridden at home on a regular basis with a martingale, and I don't feel necessarily that one need to take that with them when one go in and train with them. Yes, if you have something that is to begin with tossing its head around a lot and so on, then maybe you would like to have a martingale just to help to stabilize the horse's head. But generally speaking, I don't think we need to take that with them. And of course, in racing, it's only used when they're riding out at home. They don't wear it on the racetrack.
Okay, and back to Laura on this one. Any thoughts on groundwork or particular exercises that you would recommend in the early ridden work that you find just generally suit for suppleness? So suppleness and groundwork exercises, so not on the horse here. We're talking about poles, in-hand work. Anything to recommend?
I think I quite like using either a cone or a block or something, a wing, to get the horses to bend around, and putting it in the corner of the arena so you can, trying to get them to go into the corners and bend and be supple around the corner, because they're not used to doing that. So that I think is quite helpful. And any pole work is, whether it's a single pole or walk poles, trot poles, canter poles. I quite often think it's easier to help them do it on a circle, to have the poles on the curve. I think that's really helpful to get the horses again to bend and be supple around the inside leg, whilst keeping a balance and a rhythm over the poles. So all those kind of things are quite useful exercises.
Okay, last question. Cindy, do you do any in-hand work with your former racehorses when you start things off?
I do. Every single horse does groundwork, and I do groundwork actually with most of them before I actually get on. I think it aids with their general manners. As Yogi and Laura said, I do treat them very much as though they have just come in to be broken in, and just general manners. And I do a lot of, I like to do a lot of, I suppose turns on the forehand would be the easiest way, in hand. And we do, and I do like them to respect my space. So they are taught to step back, to rein back, which actually aids them, in an obedience way later on down the line. And we do, as Laura said, we do a great deal of pole work. I mean, I call it, Equine Pilates. We do a lot of poles on a curve, and we start that very, very quickly, actually. I like them doing poles, from virtually day one. I think it really helps, and it really does help them, particularly once you've started to raise them. It really seems to help with their core, and getting them stronger, and stepping through and going. Yeah, it's great, absolutely great. So yes, I do groundwork with all my horses, all of them.
And Yogi, that actually brings us back to where we started, when a comment you made quite early on about knowing where the brakes are. Well, actually, finding where the brakes are when you're on the ground is pretty important as well. When one of them decides to take a leap with you on the way to the field or whatever, you need those brakes even on the ground, don't you?
Yes, and I mean, like if you're just leading the horse, even the horse arrives, you lead him out from the horse box. I wouldn't just lead him in the end of the rope and then into the stable and take the head collar off. I would stop him a few times. I might even turn him one way, turn him the other way, do a few steps of rein back with him, and then put him away to already then get to know what the horse is doing and how he's reacting. I'd just like to say here, to add to all of these things, that it sounds very much when we do a webinar like this and we talk about advice and what to do things and stepping right back, that getting a horse out of training is a big deal and requires a big retraining program, etc. And I think that is very, very far from the truth. The majority of horses that come out of training is actually very, very straightforward, very, very easy to deal with. They are used to life. They are used to having rags on flapping around them when they are cantering. They are used to traffic, to cars, and all of those sort of things. They're used to travel, etc. So the majority of horses that come out of training is very, very straightforward. I think just the advice really is to use common sense, be prepared to take your time and be patient with it, study how the horse is reacting. And the reason why we say take it right back to the beginning is as much for the rider and the person as it is for the horse, because that way you kind of ticked all the boxes. you know that you have gone through this basic training and you tick the boxes. If the horse knows how to strike off the canter on both leads in a balanced way, you just need to tick the box and then move on to the next one. But I would like to just underline that it shouldn't sound as if these are big things and problems. They aren't.
I think that's really important, and actually I'll come to Cindy and Laura as well to summarise in a second. But I think that is really important for all these webinars, because sometimes it sounds like we're highlighting all the potential problems.
Yes.
And actually, let's focus on all the positives of having a former racehorse, because as you rightly point out, they generally load very well. They generally have, you know, they're usually absolutely brilliant, and they actually quite often can be quite easy in many ways. So let's focus on those positives, and that you're getting a horse that, as you say, has seen quite a bit. And hopefully it is going to be, well, it will be an enjoyable experience, the journey to get you to the final destination, as we're all hoping to get to with these horses. Laura, to summarise quickly to you.
Yeah, I think exactly what Yogi said. We've talked about probably worst case scenarios, which are very few and far between. I've never really come across any of the racehorses that have been big problems and taken time. As Yogi said, it's about just, you know, reacting and learning and ticking the boxes and moving on, but just being aware of everything. And they're, like we've said, very, very intelligent animals. And, you know, once you've taught them one thing, you can, you know, they've kind of logged it and you can move on. They're, you know, they like working. That's another massive positive, is the racehorses, they thrive on work and learning and new things. So yeah, it's keeping their brains occupied, I think, is a real key part of it as well, is to not just not bore them, give them plenty of things to think about, but reward them when they do things right, so they take on board what's good and what's bad, and that's the best way to work with them.
Thank you very much, Laura. Cindy, to you to wrap up.
Basically, just completely agreeing with Laura and Yogi. Most 90% of the horses I've dealt with, and it doesn't matter whether they're race horses or not, you know, they're very generally very straightforward. We're making it sound that they're all sort of they're not. Then very few of them are dotty. You know, give me a thoroughbred any day over some of the other breeds. And as they both said, it's like it, and it's the same with any horse. It's routine, it's consistency, and variation. And as Laura said, they're because they are so highly intelligent, vary the work. You know, don't drill them. You know, it's boring it's as boring for them as it is for the rider to keep drilling. You know, keep varying the work, and you can do so much out hacking as well, which you know, tend to forget. Not everybody is blessed with an arena or an indoor arena. You know, lots of people do lots of things out hacking. You know, great for your shoulder in up a hedge line. You know, and leg yielding and all that sort of thing. So just keep cracking on and enjoying them. Very well.
I think that can be a future webinar, Cindy, we could talk about, because as you say, there's absolutely loads you can do out hacking, and it's used. I mean, a lot of event riders. I was reading Piggy March was talking about that, how in the winter she actually starts a lot of her flat work out hacking in January time when the horse is going back in. Really good points from all three of you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you at home for joining us. I think we've got through most of the questions. If any haven't been answered, we'll obviously put them to our experts after this webinar, and we'll get some responses back to you as soon as we can. As always, you can find loads of information from RoR on the RoR website and the social media channels, and experts such as the three we've got with us tonight are heavily involved with RoR and are always happy to give their advice. So do continue to support and look at those pages and get the information that you need. Before we go, the next webinar is the 12th of January. We'll be progressing to the jumping, and I'm delighted for that. We'll be joined by Nicola Wilson and also Deirdre Johnston. So do join us on the 12th of January. But for now, Yogi Breisner, Laura Collett and Lucinda Simms, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your expertise. I'm sure everybody at home found it really enjoyable. And I'll see you all again very soon. Have a very good Christmas as well, and a very happy New Year. We'll see you in January.
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas.
Christmas.
Bye.